How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Pei Zayin, Daf 87 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, Daf Pei Zayin, we wrap up the 9th parak of Masechta Menachos. We begin the 10th parak of Masechta Menachos. How exciting! Daf Pei Zayin, we're making a splash over here in Masechta Menachos. We're really making quite the dent. The first part of today's daf, we are in wrapping up the first Amud. We are wrapping up the 9th parak. We will discuss preparing wine to be used in the Holy Temple for Nisuch Hayayin. Yes. And then we begin the 10th chapter of Masechta Menachos, and it's called Perek Shtei Midos. We are going to be talking about Shtei Midos. We are going to be talking about the Isaron and the half Isaron. Friends, let's jump in and do the things that we just talked about. Friends, we begin on Daf Pei Vav Amid Beis at the Mishnah, about a good 10-15 lines from the bottom of Daf Pei Vav Amid Beis. Says the Mishnah, Me'ayno Yemevin Es Ayayin, where would they bring the wine from? Kiduchin va'atulin alfa liyayin. Kiduchim and atulin were the best places for wine. I imagine what that means is probably the best place for grapes, I'd imagine. Shnia Lion base Rima uves Lavan Bahar, and then after that the runners up, base Rima and base Lavan in the mountains, Vikfar Signa Bibika, and Kfar Signa in the valley. The fact of the matter is all of the lands were ksheris, Ella Mikan Ayu Mevin, but these were preferable. Ein mevin lo mi beis hazvalim v'lo mi beis ashlochim v'lo mi mashenizur b'nein. As we've seen in previous Mishnahs, we don't bring the wine from fertilized fields that need to be fertilized, from fields that need to be watered, and from fields that had grain growing in them. We want them to be dedicated vineyards. The may be kosher, but if you did bring if the wine did come from these places, from the Beis Hazvalim, Beis Hashlochim, Mashnizur B'neim, it is nonetheless kosher. In Mevin Hali Steven, the may be kosher, we don't bring late harvest Gewürztraminer. We don't bring sweet wines that were left out on the vine for the sun to make them real sweet. We don't bring those. The ports, I don't know, is that how port is made? Maybe. Emevin Yoshan, we don't bring old wine. We want young wine for libations in the Holy Temple. Divrei Rebbe, that's the opinion of Rebbe v'Chacham Machshir, and Chacham say even the older wines are kasher. Emevin lo mosik v'lo me'ushin v'lo mevushul. We don't bring wines that are sweet wines. None of that cream Malaga. No cream red Concord or Manischewitz. V'lei me'ushin, not smoky wines. V'lo mevushul, not cooked wines. V'mevi posel, if you bring those wines, the Manischewitz, the smoky wines, the cooked wines, pasul. V'mevin min adolius, interestingly, we don't bring wine from vines, from trellises, from vines that were trellised. I mean, generally speaking, you pass a vineyard and all the vines are on these trellis, right? They're like on trellis kind of things. They're hanging because no, rather elimina raglius. We want vines that are on the ground. I got to ask my friend Donnie Friedenberg about that. Uminakromim ha-avudin, and we bring them from vineyards that have been cultivated. V'lo konsin osen b'chatzovin gedolim. We don't put the wine in these big casks. Ella, rather b'chavius ketanas, in smaller barrels. Ve'eno memalias achavius ad pia. We don't fill up the barrel all the way up to the brim, to its max level. We don't fill it up to its max level. Kedei she'reicho nodef. We want to have some extra space in the barrels, that there could be a geschmack, a shmek. You want that when you open the barrel, there's a shmek of Gan Eden. And if you fill up the barrel all the way, so then there isn't that place for the aromas to aromate. Kadesh Yerechen Odev says a gishmak shmek. Maybe mi pia, and when offering the wine from the barrel, we don't offer the wine from the top of the barrel. Mipnei ha kmachin, because at the top of the barrel, that's where there's going to be if there's mold or whatever, it'll be at the top of the wine. So we don't want to bring from the top of the wine. Velo mishulel, but also not from the bottom of the barrel. Mipnei hashmarim, because that's where all the sediment is. Elo, maybe mi shlisha me emtza. It's a little bit unclear exactly what this means, but be'etzem, in the middle, from the middle of the barrel, you put in some kind of a spigot, and you're going to pour the wine from that spigot in the middle of the barrel. And how do you check the wine to make sure it looks good? Hagizber Yoshev, the treasurer sits, Ba'akona biyadon, he's got a stick. Zarak Agir, and if he sees that some of the froth that is on the sediment is coming out through the spigot, Hikish Bakane, he strikes with his stick. I imagine not very hard, but he taps with his stick probably, either on the guy who's manning the spigot or on the barrel itself. And the guy who's manning the spigot closes the spigot because there's froth coming out. And so you want to make sure that what's coming out is pure wine. And once you see froth, you say, stop right there. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, Yain sheyesh bo kmachin, any wine that has any amount of mold on it, pasul, shenemar tmimim yulachim uminchasam, that the korbanos and the menachos need to be tmimim, they need to be whole, they need to be perfect. Tmimim yu lachim v'niskeim, as well as their nisachim, as well as their libations. The wine needs to be perfect. It can't have any mold on it. And mevin lo mosik v'lo mevushal v'lo meushin v'maybe pasul. It says the Gemara that we had said in our Mishnah that we may not bring wine we may not bring Manischewitz wine. V'lo mevushal, not if it's cooked and not if it's smoked. V'maybe pasul, if you bring it, pasul. V'akatani reisha, but 1 second. But didn't it say earlier, ein mevin es hali Steven v'im hevi kosher? But we had said earlier that we don't bring late harvest Gewürztraminer. We don't bring wines that are naturally sweet. Well, wines that are sweetened on the vine. So why are we saying if you v'im kosher, if you did it's kosher? So why buy the Holly Steven? Why buy the wine that why when the grapes were sweetened by being kept on the vine and the sun sweetened them? Why is that kosher, yet the Manischewitz, poor Manischewitz, is pasul? So Ravina kroch usni. Ravina says, lump them all together. Even the Holly Steven is pasul as well. Manischewitz, Holly Steven, can't use them for libations. Rav Asher says that there's a big difference between Manischewitz and Holly Steven. Chulia de Shimsha lo ma'is. Chulia de Feira ma'is. It depends. A late harvest Gewürztraminer that by design was left on the vine for a long time to soak up the sun and get really sweet and sugary, and it makes a delicious dessert wine. That's Givaldig. That's Geschmack. Manischewitz, it depends what you're in. Some people, maybe, it's a different thing. Manischewitz is a whole different thing. It's a whole different thing. So Manischewitz, sorry for the Manischewitzes and the people who like Manischewitz. I'm sure it's amazing. Everyone's into their own things. It seems like this Mishnah, however, would say to not bring Manischewitz. Ein mevin yoshon, we don't bring old wine. Rebbe, that is the opinion of Rebbe. The Chacham say you can bring old wine. Amar Chizkiah, my time of the Rebbe. Says Chizkiah, how come Rebbe says that you can't bring old wine? Amar Krok, because the Pasuk says la keves yoyin, because the Pasuk says la keves yoyin, that we juxtapose wine to the sheep. Makeves ben shnaso, just like a keves is in its first year. An ayil, a ram, is in its second year. A keves means first year. So just like a ram, just like a keves, a sheep, is in its first year. Av yayin ben shnaso. So when we talk about wine, we're also talking about wine that's in its first year, young wine. Well, one second. If that's kind of where we're going with this, then let's go ada sof and say, okay, when it comes to a sheep, if it must be in its first year. If it's in its second year, it's pasul. Are we going to say the same thing about wine, that it must be young? According to Rebbe, it must be in its first year. If it's older than that, it's pasul. And if you're going to say, yeah, that's what we're saying, well, you can't. Because we learn in a brisa, yayin ben shtei shonim lo yavi. A brisa says that 2-year-old wine, don't bring it. However, if you did bring it, it is in fact kasher. De Omar lo yavi. Now, who's the one who says don't bring old wine? Rebbe. Rebbe's the one who says don't bring old wine. So this is the opinion of Rebbe. We're saying don't bring wine that's 2 years old, and yet the karma may be kosher. It's saying if you brought it, it is nonetheless kasher. So the comparison to the sheep is tricky, because yes, a sheep is 1 year old, and yes, Rebbe does say that the wine that's brought does need to be within its first year. However, a sheep that's 2 years old, when you need to bring a 1-year-old sheep, if you bring a 2-year-old sheep, it's possible. And yet, Rebbe says when it comes to 2-year-old wine, it's actually kasher. Ella Amar Rava rather says, Rava, I know time with Rebbe. This is why Rebbe says that it should be in its first year. However, if it's in its second year, it is nonetheless kasher. Dichsiv, altera yayin kiyis adam. Don't ogle red wine. And wine is reddest when it is in its first year. So since the pasuk in Mishlei needs to warn about ogling red wine in its first year, that means that that's when the wine is the best. In its first year, it's reddest. Don't ogle it at that time. Ogle or ogle? Probably ogle. I feel like ogle. Don't ogle wine. Ogle. What a word. Ogle. Ogle probably means like to chalish. To ogle. Ogle is a geschmacke English word. Are there geschmack English? There's geschmack Yiddish words, like to chalish about something. It's pretty geschmack. To ogle. Ogles feels like it's like, yeah, that could be like a Yiddish English word. Ogle. So the point is, from the fact that the pasuk in Mishlei says don't ogle red wine, and the red wine is it's the reddest in its first year, that means that that's like the best wine, and that's what you're going to want to, not ogle, but yes, offer on the mizbeach. We don't bring wine that grew on trellises. Tana kromim ha'avudim pa'amayim bashana. We said that the wine should come from cultivated vineyards. These vineyards are vineyards that have been, I think, like plowed or dug under the vines, cared for twice a year, biannually. What does what does biannually mean? Does that mean every 2 years or twice per year? Every 2 years or twice per year? Biannual. I feel like it means every 2 years. Biannual. I feel like it means every 2 years. Okay, twice per year. Rav Yosef Avale Karna de Pardesa. Rav Yosef had a shtickle vineyard. De Rafik Bey Tafe Rivka, and he did what we just described. He like dug under the vines or whatever twice per year, twice yearly. Ve'avar Chamra did Dari Maya Al Chad Train, and that vineyard that he cared for in this way, Mamish created a very, very chazak, a gevaldige wine. We've seen before the Memra of Rava, that Rava says that good wine, that real wine, is wine that you need to dilute 3 parts water to 1 part wine. Meaning, wine is good when it's strong, and you need to, because they used to dilute their wine, and you need to mamish dilute it. It needs to, it's not just some weak wine that you just drink. No, you got to dilute it stark. So we're saying that Rav Yosef's vineyard produced wine that, however you would have to. There was like everybody else's wine, and there was Rav Yosef's wine. However much water you had to use to dilute everybody else's wine, you needed twice as much water to dilute Rav Yosef's wine, because it was packed full of flavor. Lo ayu konsin oson bechatzovin gedolim. They would not, the wine would not be placed into these big vats. Tana, we learned in the Brisa, chovius, that these barrels are kadius, they're small barrels. Ludius, benonius, these mid-sized small barrels from, these mid-sized barrels from load. Ein manichen oson shtaim, and we don't put two of these barrels next to each other, just in case one of them goes bad, and then the other one picks up the smell from the other one, it takes in the smell. No, keep them ella achas, one at a time. You don't want to keep them next to each other, just in case one of them goes bad and ends up making the one next to it go bad. We don't want that. Ketzad bodek gizber yoshev v'kana b'yado. So how do we check the wine to make sure that it is good? Well, we have the temper treasurer. He's sitting there and he's got a stick. Zorak agir hekish b'kana. And if he sees that out from the spigot comes froth from the sediment, so then he gives a tap with his stick, and they halt the spigot. Tana, it started the Brisa, Zarek Hagir Shel Shmarim, if the froth from the sediment starts exiting through the spigot, Gizbar Ikish Bekana, so the treasurer taps with his stick, Vilemale Maimer. Fekti Gemara, why does he need to tap with the stick? Why not just say, stop the spigot? Mesele, the Rabbi Yochanan, this supports Rabbi Yochanan. Dam Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan, Kishem sha'adibur yafel b'samim, just like we say in Ein Kelokenu, right? Kishu, what is it? Kishu, whatever. Omer, Kishu, what is it called? Shuhu, I can't remember the next word. Omer, Hadek hetev adek, mipnei sha'kol yafel b'samim. Right? That we say that the voice. Why can't I remember now? Ukshu. Oh boy, it's yeah. Who cares? It's not going to bother me that much, I hope. Anyways, just like a voice speaking while working with the besamim is beneficial to the besamim. Kach dibur ra leyain. Speaking around wine is detrimental to the wine. Reb Dennis at the Jezreel Valley Winery, what do? Do they talk over there, or it's a quiet geschäft, so as not to disturb the wine? What do? Rabbi Yossi, by Rabbi Yehuda Omer v'chulei, boy, Rabbi Yochanan asks, Hekdishamau. Okay, so what if you are makdish, right? So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda had said that if the wine is moldy, if there's any mold in the wine, it's pasul. Says Rabbi Yochanan, what if you were makdish that wine? Ma'u sheyilka olav. Would you get makis mishum balmum, because like as if you were makdish a balmum for being over a lab? Came in the pasuk balmum dami. Since the wine is pasul, it's like you're makdish a balmum. You should be chayiv makis or dimwa. Perhaps ain't balmum el beveim. Maybe balmum is only by an animal teku. It's a tie. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Eilim mi Moav, the best rams are from Moav. Kvasim mi Chevron, the best sheep are from Chevron. Agolim mi Sharon, the best calves are from Sharon. Gozalos mi Amelech, and the best birds, the Torim and the Bnei Yonah, the best Torim and Bnei Yonah come from Har Melech. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, Mevin kvasim shegavon kirachbon. Says Rabbi Yehuda, we want to bring sheep that are brighter v longer, as wide as they are tall. Rava says, Rava, by Rav Shila, my time to Rabbi Yehuda, why does Rabbi Yehuda say that we were looking for the brighter v longers, for the sheep that are as wide as they are tall? Tichsiv, as the pasuk says, Yire miknecha bayomahu kar nirchov. The pasuk says in Yeshaya that in the future, when things are mamish givaldig, so your sheep will graze in a very wide and broad pasture, and kar in this case is a reference to sheep. So we want big, wide sheep, brighter v longer. Ksiv al chomosayich Yerushalayim ifkadati shom kol hayom v'chol halayla tomid lo yecheshom azkirim es Hashem al domi lochem. Says the pasuk also in Yeshaya, but about 30 prakim later, al chomosayich Yerushalayim ifkadati shomim, on your borders, on your walls, O Jerusalem, I have designated guards, kol hayom v'chol halayla, all day, all night, tomid, Always, lo yecheshu, they will not be silent. Hamazkirim. Dennis, remember this? Remember this ridiculous word? The remembrancers, es Hashem, the remembrancers of God, al domi lochem, will not be quiet. The remembrancers. Yeah, right. Not a word. My Amre, what are they saying? Right? Tamid lo yecheshu amazkirim es Hashem al domi lochem. What are they saying? Omar Rove bar Rav Shila, Ato sokum tirachim Tzion. You will rise up and have mercy on Zion. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Omar says, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Bonei Yerushalayim Hashem, that the Rabbanu Shalom builds Yerushalayim. Amen. Umeikara my Abu Amri. When there was the Beis Hamikdash, what were they saying? Because the Yerushalayim was built. Omar Rav bar Rav Shila ki bocher Hashem b'Tzion iva l'Moshe Avloi. That the Rabbanu Shalom chose Zion as a place for him to dwell. Hajj and Allah called Korbanos Hatzibur. Ever since October 7th, I've noticed that my friends that have babies, they name them like these very like stark names. One of my friends named his Yingle Oz Yehuda. I was just at a bris the other day. What's the baby's name? I think Adir Tzion. Very like stark names, you know. Woof. Wow. Says the Mishnah, the first Mishnah in the 10th parak of Masechta Menachos, parak Shtei Midos Shel Yavesh Hayu B'Mikdash. There were two measures for dry goods in the Beis Hamikdash. I imagine it's probably primarily flour. Isaron v'chatzi isaron. Those two measures, those two measuring cups, were an isaron and a half isaron. Reb Meir Omer isaron v'chatzi isaron. Reb Meir says that there were two types of isarons and a half isaron. Isaron ma'ayim mishamish bo. What would they do with the isaron? What was that used for? Well, shaboyim moded l'chol amenochis. That was the power horse. The isaron measure was used for all of the menachis. Lo haya moded lo bishlosha lepayv lo bishel shnaim la'ayil. Right, a cow has 3 isarons of flour. There was no 3 isaron measuring cup. There was a 1 isaron measuring cup, and you would measure out 3 of those isarons. For a ram, 2 of those isarons. There was no 2 isaron measuring cup. Ella modidon isar esronos. Rather, you would just scoop up 3 times, 2 times, 1 time, whatever you needed. Chatzi isaron ma'ayim mishamish. What was the use for the half isaron? Who could tell me? Remember. Think. Shebo aya moded chavite kohen gadol mechza baboker v'mechza ben abayim. Of course, the kohen gadol, the minchas chavitin, was in isaron. Half of it was offered in the morning, half at night. Basically, if you remember, the Gemara is I feel a little weird talking about this because the Gemara is going to kind of ask a question on it, but who cares? We had discussed that essentially the way it works is that the Kohen Gadol brings a full isaron, and then he'll take that, right? So the half of it is offered in the morning, half in the afternoon. So he'll take the isaron and scoop out. He'll take the half isaron measure and scoop out half of an isaron, so that and that's what the half isaron was used for, to scoop up half of an isaron for the minchas chavitin. Says the Gemara, Tani within a brayso, Reb Meir would say, Mata mudlomar isaron lakeves. The pasuk says, it's probably by the Korban Talmud, I think. Isaron lakeves achar b'kodesh hasei. Yeah, I think so. Isaron lakeves milamid shtei esrei nisayu b'mikdash. There were 2 versions of the isaron measure in the holy temple. Echad garush ve'echad machuk. One was smaller than the other. One was overflowing and the other one was flat. So one was exactly an isaron, and then you would flatten it out and you'd have an exact isaron. The other was smaller and you would fill it up and it would be overflowing. It would be, I think a better word than overflowing is probably heaping. It would be you'd have a heaping scoop. Gadu shabo aya moded l'chol ha menachos. The heaping isaron, according to Reb Meir, was used for all of the menachos. Machuk, the exact isaron that you would flatten out, shabo aya moded l'chavite kohen gadol, that was used for the minchas chavitin of the kohen gadol. The chacham say lo aya sham ella isaron echad, whereas the chacham say no. There was only one type of isaron. The Gemara is going to ask which one, the flat one, the heaping one, but we'll get there in a minute. A few minutes maybe. El isaron echad, there was one type of isaron measuring cup. Shenemar v'isaron echad la kevis, one isaron for the kevis or echad. Emken matam lomer isaron. Now Reb Meir had learned that from isaron that there are two isarons. What do the rabbis do with isaron? The rabbis chatz isaron. Isaron is to include that there was also, in addition to the isaron measuring cup, according to the rabbis, there was the half isaron measuring cup. Reb Meir chatz isaron minoli. How does Reb Meir know about the half isaron measuring cup? Nafkalei mi vi isaron. When the pasuk says vi isaron echad lakevis, from the extra vav, he learns out the half isaron as well. For Rabbanan vav l'darshe, the rabbis don't learn out anything from that vav. They don't have a tradition of anything from that vav. Reb Meir, hi, v'isaron echad lakevis echad mai avadle. What does he do with isaron echad lakevis echad? The rabbis say that means that there's one isaron. What Reb Meir says is two isarons. So what does he do with isaron echad? So shelo yimdod lo b'shel shlosha laparv lo b'shel shnayim la'ayil. It means that there aren't any others. There's no two isaron scoop for a ram and a three isaron measuring cup for a cow. There's just the isaron, nothing else. That's what we're learning from isaron echad, to exclude a two isaron or a three isaron cup. V'rabanan nafkalahu. How do the rabbis know that there's no two isaron measure or three isaron measure? Mi nekudo, because the sign is, we're learning a brisa. Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yossi, lama nakud vav shebeemtza isaron shall isaron rishon shel yom tov rishon shel chag. That's a mouthful. On the first day of Sukkot, if you look in the psukim in Sefer Bamidbar, Perek Chav Tes, Pasuk Tes Vav. So this pasuk is on the first day of Sukkot, and it says, "V'isaron isaron lakevis echad." The first isaron, right? Let me read it inside, right? Nokav shebeemsa isaron. That in the middle of the word isaron, on the letter vav, in the word isaron, there is a dot over the vav. Shall isaron rishon, of the first isaron, because it says isaron. So the first word isaron. Shal Yom Tov Arishon Shel Chag, on the first day of Sukkot in Parshas Pinchas, there's a vav on top of there's a dot on top of the vav. Why? It's going to limit something. Shalo Yimdod Lo B'Shel Gimel Aparv Lo B'Shel Shnaim La'ayil. According to the rabbis, that dot is to say that there's not going to be any two isaron measure or three isaron measure. Rav Meir Nekudo Lo Darsh. Rav Meir doesn't learn out anything from that dot. Chatzi isaron ma oyam mishamish b'oyam moded lechavite kohen gadol. We said in the Mishnah that the role of the half isaron was for the kohen gadol to measure half an isaron for the minchas chavitin. Moded, what do you mean he would measure it out, right? So this is why I was saying that we're going to get to in the Gemara. We want to say that the implication from the Mishnah is that, let's go weiter for a second. Ramini, we have a contradiction from a Mishnah on Daf Nun Amid Beis, and a Mishnah on Daf Nun Amid Beis, we learned, that was a month ago already, Chavite Kohen Gadol, lo are you ba'in chatzayin. You wouldn't just scoop up half an isaron in the morning and half an isaron in the afternoon. No. Elamevi isaron shalom. He brings a full isaron, v'chotzeyu, and then he halves it. So we want to argue that our Mishnah sounds like the Kohen Gadol simply goes over to a bunch of flour, scoops up half an isaron in the morning and half an isaron in the afternoon, but that's not the way it works. First, he takes a full isaron, and only then, from the full isaron, he halves it with half isaron. Amr of Sheshes, my moded nami dekatani mechalik. Yeah, hold your horses. When it says moded, it means that he's dividing up the isaron. It's not saying that he's scooping up milichatchila a half an isaron. There's already an isaron, and from that he's dividing it using the half isaron measure. But mine Rami Bar Chama Rav Chizda, Rami Bar Chama asked Rav Chizda, Chatzi isaron l'Rab Meir gadu shaya omachu kaya. Rami Bar Chama asked Rav Chizda, well, according to Rab Meir, there are two isarons. One is heaping and one is exact. But there's only one half isaron. Is that half isaron heaping or exact? V'tibayilach, Reb Chizda responds, why don't you ask l'Rabbanon? Also, according to the rabbis, it's not just Reb Meir who has a half isaron measure. The rabbis also have a half isaron measure. So ask according to them as well. Is it heaping or not? L'Rabbanon isaron gufe kami bayali. So Rabbi Chama says the fact of the matter is, according to the rabbis, not only am I curious about the half isaron, I'm also curious about the isaron. Is there isaron heaping or not? Gadush was the isar, the one isaron of the rabbis, was it heaping or machukay, or was it exact? Amalei Rav Chizda says midrab Meir nishma midrab Meir nishma l'Rab Meir, umidrab Meir also nishma l'Rabbanan. From Rab Meir we will learn more about Rab Meir, and from Rab Meir we'll also learn about the Chachamim. Mi de Amar Rab Meir isaron machuk. Chetzi isar nami machuk. Well, listen to this, says Rav Chizda. Fact of the matter is, Rab Meir told us that what was the exact isaron used for the chavite kohen gadol? The exact, right? We had said earlier that according to Rab Meir, there's a heaping isaron and an exact isaron. The heaping isaron was for all the menachos. The exact isaron was for the chavite kohen gadol. The exact isaron was for the chavite kohen gadol, which means that you would use an exact measure to measure out the flour for the chavite kohen gadol. Now, half of it was offered in the morning, which means that you're going to use a measure, and that was the whole point of the half isaron. The half isaron, there was only one purpose for the half isaron, and that was to measure out half of the chavite kohen gadol. So therefore, if the chavite kohen gadol were milichatchila being measured with an exact isaron, so to divide it in half, you're going to want to have an exact half isaron. So to answer your question, from the fact that the regular isaron for the chavite kohen gadol was an exact isaron, so then the half isaron, which is specifically for the chavite kohen gadol, is going to be half of an exact isaron. So it is exact. Again, so answers of Chizda Mida Amar Meir, from the fact that Reb Meir says that isaron machuk, that when it comes to the chavite kohen gadol, we're talking about an exact isaron. So chatzi isaron, so the chatzi isaron, which is used to divide the minchas chavitin in half, that's also going to be nami machuk. That's also going to be an exact half isaron. With Reb Meir machuk, and then from the fact that Reb Meir says that the isaron and half isaron of the kohen gadol are exact, the Rabbanan Nami Machuk, so the rabbis will also say that it is exact, because the rabbis, all they argue about with Reb Meir is that Reb Meir says there's two isarons, the Chacham say there's one isaron, but they don't necessarily argue when it comes to minchas chavitin, and whether the minchas chavitin was going to be a heaping isaron or an exact isaron, and therefore, from the fact that Reb Meir says that when it comes to minchas chavitin, we're talking about exact isarons and exact half isarons, the rabbis don't disagree with that. Therefore, the rabbis say that by the minchas chavitin also, we're talking about exact isaron and exact half isaron. And since the rabbis only have one isaron, and they're saying that by the minchas chavitin it's an exact isaron, clearly the one isaron that exists according to them is the exact isaron. There is no heaping isaron according to the rabbis. Rav Chizda asks Rav Chizda, Chavite kohen gadol bame michalkon lechalus biyad o bekli. You see, the chavite kohen gadol, so half would be, so you would take half of the flour, you make it into dough. According to Rashi, it's talking about dough. According to Tosfos, it's talking about the flour. Okay, let's say the dough according to Rashi. Now that dough, right? So the minchas chavitin is 12 loaves divided in half. We saw the Rambam who says it's 12 half loaves. Rashi assumes it's 6 divided into 6 and 6. So in the morning there are 6 loaves. So you're going to take the half isaron and you're going to divide it into 6 loaves. Now, was that an exact science? Was there some kind of a measure to measure out the 6 loaves, the 6 doughs that you're dividing it into? Or were you eyeballing it? Were you just using your hand to divide it up? Pshita de biyad, it is with the hand. It's not an exact measure. Tibekli, because if we're talking about a vessel, tortin yachnis, what you're going You can bring a scale and weights and stuff into the Azara. Yeah, why not? I mean, if you need to weigh it out, you'll weigh it out, sure. So Kevon de Biklala Ksiv Lav Orachar. Since in the Tochacha, in Parshas B'chukosa, it says, B'shivri lochem mate lechem va'afu eser noshim nachmechem b'soner echad. 10 women are going to be baking bread in only one oven. Ve'shivu lachmechem b'mishkal. There's going to be so little that they're going to have to weigh out who gets what amount. So since weighing out dough and weighing out bread is a connotation of the tochacha, so therefore we're not going to be doing that. We're not going to be bringing scales and weights and weighing doughs in the Azara. 1 second. Drinking a little water, and then we're going to wrap up over here. The shulchan in the Heichel, the shulchan that had the 12 showbreads on it, the shulchan that had the baziche levona on it. Ma'ushi kadesh kmotzim bigodesh shelo. What if you didn't put the frankincense in the bazichin, in the spoons, in the ladles, and then put the ladles on the shulchan? No, you took a kometz of frankincense and you put it directly on the shulchan. Would the shulchan be mikadesh that frankincense, or do they need to be in the ladles, in the bazichin? Mid mikadesh lechem kmotzim nami mikadesh. Do we say that since the shulchan is mikadesh the breads that are on the shulchan, so they'll also be mikadesh any frankincense that's put on the shulchan, even without the bazichin? Or Dilmor, perhaps the chazile mikadesh, or perhaps what is fit, what is supposed to be put on the shulchan, as it is supposed to be put on the shulchan, the shulchan will be mikadesh that. The breads are supposed to be put directly on the shulchan, therefore the shulchan is mikadesh the breads. Dilo chazile, but frankincense, which is not supposed to be put directly on the shulchan, it's supposed to be put in bazichin, and those bazichin are meant to be put on the shulchan. Lo mikadesh, therefore maybe the shulchan is not mikadesh the frankincense. Amr lei, Rab Chizda says, Eino Mekadesh, the shulchan will not be Mekadesh the frankincense if they are just heaped on the table directly and not in the bazichin. Ini, but is that really so? Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, L'divrei Omer, Tfachayim v'mechza kopel maybe, Nimtza shulchan Mekadesh chamisha also tefach l'mayla. L'divrei Omer, Tfachayim kopel, Nimtza shulchan Mekadesh yud based tefach l'mayla. Okay, Chevra, I am not going to get into the details over here. I was thinking about putting together diagrams and stuff. A, Yontif is starting soon, and I'm kind of running low on time. And B, this is not the main sugya of it. If this was the sugya, then yeah, of course, I think it would be important to see this. But the main sugya is going to be on Daf Tzadi Vav in about a week or so. So we'll look at diagrams and we'll figure out this properly then. For now, suffice it to say that there were 12 showbreads. The showbreads were stacked up on the shulchan in 2 stacks, 6 showbreads in each stack. And essentially, let's say, if you say that each showbread had a height of 2.5 tefachim, so that means that 2.5 times 6 is 15 tefachim. And if you say that each showbread had a height of 2 tefachim, so then 6 times 2 is 12. So says Rabbi Yochanan, let's read it back inside. Rabbi Yochanan, the Divrei Omer, according to the opinion, says Tfachayim v'mechza kofel, that essentially the height of each showbread was 2.5 tefachim. Nimtza shulchan mekadesh chamisha asa tefach l'mayla. So the shulchan, which has these 2 stacks of 15 tefachim each, right? 6 times 2.5. So the table is mekadesh what is within 15 tefachim of its height, of its airspace above. If you say that the height of each showbread was 2 tefachim, so then anything above the table within 12 tefachim, the table would be mekadesh. So how could Rav Chizda say that the shulchan is not mekadesh, the frankincense that's heaped onto the table directly, when apparently the table is mekadesh anything that's within 15 tefachim, or at least 12 tefachim of its height, above it? Rav Chizda responds, Eino mekadesh li karev, ava mekadesh li pasul. When we say that it is mekadesh, It's Mekadesh li puzzle. If a Tvul Yom now touches the frankincense, it'll be puzzle. If it'll be puzzle biyotze, for example, if it's taken out of the Azara. But to be able to be burnt on the Mizbeach, it's not Mekadesh for that. Friends, that was that Pei Zayin of Masechta Menachos. And that Pei Zayin of Masechta Menachos, we wrapped up the 9th parak of Masechta Menachos. We talked about where wine is brought, comes from for the Beis HaMikdash. And then we began the 10th parak of Masechta Menachos, Perik Shtei Midos, and we talked about the machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chacham about how many measures were there in the Beis HaMikdash. Going to Reb Meir, there were 2 types of isarons. One was smaller and it was a heaping isaron. The other one was a exact isaron. And then, according to Reb Meir, there was also a half isaron. According to the Chacham, there was the half isaron and just 1 isaron, which we said was the exact isaron. And that's where we got to today. Friends, I'll catch you tomorrow. Cheers.